Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Lure Building with Zach Baker. I'm Zach Baker and today we're doing the much requested shad glide bait. I have this pattern available for free on my website if you're looking to build your own. It's a little 4.5 inch glide bait that's modeled after a shad. I've got the top and bottom for it. Again, I'll have that linked down below if you're wanting it. It's free to download. Unfortunately, I can't print and ship them right now, but if that's something you guys are interested in the future, maybe I could put together a lure building stencil package if that's something you guys are interested in. Let's not waste any more time. We'll go ahead and jump into building this bait. Okay, got the bait sanded. It's ready to move on to our next step. While everything's still square, this is the part where I like to go ahead and cut the joint and then drill all my holes for the weight and the line ties. What I like to do, rather than trying to cut out the other side of the pattern and glue it on to get this line, I like to just use the pencil, make a little mark on both sides where that's at. And I use kind of like a little speed square. That way my line's nice and straight. And I just make a little pencil mark on both sides. And then same thing, I'll put a little line on both ends because this side there's no square edges. So I'm just lining up my two lines. And so now you know that that's perfectly symmetrical to that than it is on that side. Now we're going to move on to putting on our top and bottom of the stencil. So I like to use a little thumbtack to start the hole, that way your drill bit doesn't want to wander all over the place. That usually works pretty good. You could also use a center punch, but thumbtacks are pretty cheap. Next thing I'm going to do is use this block of wood that's been cut about a 45-degree angle. I got it set up in the vise, and then I'm going to be cutting it almost all the way through. You can see the center line right here. I'm not going to cut all the way to the center line, but get as close as I can. Keeping everything in one piece makes it easier to shape the bait equally on both sides. Flipped it around in the vise, and I'm just going to cut down almost to the center line again on the other side. Got everything prepped. We have one more thing we're going to do before we start sanding it down to shape, and that is marking out the eye. I just use the stencil pattern and the thumbtack to mark it. If you wanted, you could cut it out or glue it on there, but all we needed was a little hole to know where to drill. I'm going to be drilling out the eyelets bigger later, but for right now, I'm just using the same drill bit from earlier just to mark it. That way, once it's sanded down, it'll be easier to know where the eyes are supposed to go. I went ahead and shaded in this one area just in case it was kind of confusing on which line I was saying to sand down to. But the rest of it is just sand down to it. If you have a bandsaw or like a jigsaw, this might be a good time to use that. For me, the belt sander works pretty quick. I'm running about an 80 grit belt on there, and it eats away the poplar pretty quick, so it makes easy work. I'm going to be careful not to sand too much more on the front of the bait. I don't want to take out too much material. What I like to do is just hold it up to the belt sander at an angle and start eating away that material at the top, and I'm going to be doing the same thing on the bottom. Again, you could use some sandpaper or a little chisel to carve it back, whatever works for you. For me, this is the quickest method. You do want to be cautious and make sure that both sides are symmetrical. That's going to make sure that the bait swims correctly in the water. I'm not going to mess too much with the tail. I'm going to go in later with the Dremel tool and kind of clean that up a little bit, but I'm going to get as close as I can. Going back in with the Dremel tool and cleaning up the tail just a little bit. Again, not taking too much material off the back of the tail. We're going to do some carving on it later, but it works good to get a nice smooth transition from body to tail. Now we got the bait ready to do some nice hand sanding before we do some hand carving on it. I like to use a 120 grit just to get rid of all those marks from the belt sander and the Dremel tool. I did a whole bunch of sanding off camera, and then I went ahead and moved on to a 220 grit. Now, the better job you do sanding now, the better your paint job is going to look later. It's a lot of extra time, but worth the effort. So I like using a little piece of leather laid out on the table. Kind of helps give it a little bit of grip, and I'm not getting paint transfer from my spray booth all over the fishing lure. So what I did was took the other half of the bait, the other stencil, and I cut out where the tail is, and then used a X-Acto knife and cut out all the gill plates and the fins. And I just cut out the eye, that way I have a point of reference to line it up on the bait. And we're going to use this on both sides to draw out where we're going to be carving out the gill plates and the tail. I always like to look straight at the bottom and kind of turn it left to right so you can see that both fins are lined up nicely and the gill plates come in line with each other. So normally on a bait, when it's a lot bigger, I'll go ahead and separate the joint and stuff like that, but when it's smaller like this, I like leaving it connected while I carve the gill plates. That way there's something more to hold on to. It makes it a little bit easier. All I'm going to do, if you've watched any other sort of lure building videos, a very common method is using a sharp X-Acto knife, trace out the gill plates, and then carve up to them. That's exactly what I'm going to do. There you have it, first little section of the gill cut out. I'm going to go ahead and do a little time lapse here. We're going to get the rest of this carved out on both sides, and we'll be ready to move on to our next step. Alright, got everything carved. There's still a little bit more hand sanding I would like to do to it, but what I'm going to go ahead and do at this point is go ahead and finish separating the joint using the same saw we started the joint with earlier. And there we go, got it separated. I'm going to do a little bit of hand sanding on the inside and kind of clean up where those saw marks are. We're going to move back over to the workbench and make the eyelets and hook hangers for the bait, along with adding in some weight to it. For the line ties, I'm just going to use some 19 gauge galvanized steel wire wrapped around a finishing nail in the vise. In order to make the joint, you're going to stick 2 of them together, and that does the trick pretty good. Okay, we got our eyelets and joints made up. What I like to do, because it's real important that these holes we're going to drill out for the joints to be aligned correctly. That way when you assemble the bait, it's not, off-centered. That's really dramatic, but even being a little bit off-centered kind of makes the bait look funny and could potentially affect the way that it swims depending on the type of bait you're making. So what I like to do is use one of these little guys. I have it just below an inch. I'll hold it up, and this is for the bottom joint. I'll just make a little mark. And do the same thing on this one with it before I move anything. And then make a little mark on this one too. And I'm going to go to about a 1/2 inch, maybe a little less. And I'll make my top mark. And now we got our points where they'll line up perfectly with each other. And again, I'm going to use this little thumbtack to kind of make some holes to start it. That way my drill bit doesn't want to wander. Alright, I'm going to drill these out. Now we got our holes, so we are ready to add in some weight. And then we're going to seal this bad boy up and glue in the rest of our eyelets except for the joint, because we still want it to be in 2 pieces so we can paint and clear coat on the inside. If you guys don't have a lead melting pot, that's no big deal. You can use some normal fishing weights to put in the hole. It's a little bit harder to do that, but it still works just as good. When I'm filling the holes, I like to use super glue and baking soda and then sand it down. At this point, this bait is ready for some paint. I'm going to have that in another video, and I'll have that linked below once it's done. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you're wanting this pattern, I have it for free on my website, and I'll have it linked below. Hope you guys have a phenomenal rest of your day, and I will catch you later.